Welcome, everybody, to the Catholic Entrepreneurs Guild podcast. My name is Andrew Jacoby, and I am blessed to be joined today by Travis Callaway. Travis, thank you so much for joining.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
I'm looking forward to speaking with you. Travis actually reached out to me based on a podcast that I was on, and we started connected over LinkedIn. So I'm looking forward to hearing his story, as he has listened to an hour of mine. So, from the Catholic Herald, my interview with Gavin Ashenden, which was great. Travis is an entrepreneur committed to his Catholic faith, so we're looking forward to learning a little bit more about what that means in detail. But before we do, this podcast today is sponsored by Good Shepherd Staffing, which is my company. We are helping Catholics in developing countries find work that enables them to make a local living wage, as well as be able to work from home so they can be with their families, because in a lot of developing countries, for example, the Philippines in particular, people have to either leave their provinces and go to Manila, or they have to leave the country completely, and that really hurts their ability to both form and maintain family relationships. So if they can work from home, much better. So that's what we're trying to do. If you've never worked with a remote virtual assistant, as many people have not, we have an offer where we'll give you 10 hours for free. So to try it out, we will pay the person. They are not working for free. We are paying them. And then if you like them, if they're just a sort of entry-level virtual assistant, it would be under $1,000 a month full-time. And then obviously other roles and experiences, the prices will vary. So that's about it. If that sounds of interest to you, go to goodshepherdstaffing.com and reach out. We'd be happy to facilitate. Anyway, great. Sponsorship read over. Travis, again, welcome. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and a little bit about your sort of faith and professional journey and how they intertwine. So please take us there.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and chat with people like yourself, who I think are doing important things in the culture. And I'd like to say that I'm striving to do the same. I think insofar as I can help impact the culture in a positive way and do so with Christ at the sort of as our shining light. Yeah, that's kind of the reason I do what I do. But by way of background, I'll share really briefly family, sort of faith side, and then professional side, and ultimately how those interact. So I grew up in a Protestant household. My father was actually a Baptist pastor for 36 years. And so, I grew up in a very anti-Catholic home, to say that. Not hostile necessarily, but just, the Catholics had it all wrong. They've misunderstood everything. They've added a bunch of stuff. And so I really brought that in like hook, line, and sinker. I believe that fully, and went into adulthood believing that. Having said that, I abandoned my faith entirely. So when I was in university, I bought into all the lies that so many people do in, liberal, progressivist, academic institutions that challenged my faith, made me feel like I was, intellectually inferior for having a belief in anything outside of like the here and now and physical, what I can see and touch. And so I just abandoned my faith entirely. And I'd say probably lived some version of a hedonistic, materialistic, practically atheistic. I never would have called myself an atheist, but I was behaving as if I was one for probably, most of my adult life until about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the faith background before I found the church. And then professionally went to university, came out of university, worked in the sports advertising industry for a number of years, did an MBA in finance, really liked finance, so made a change, pursued the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst designation after that, which is kind of like the credential if you want to be a portfolio manager. So I moved into finance, ended up working in the field of finance for almost 8 years, mostly in the fields of private equity and venture capital, which is where I sort of dabbled in entrepreneurship for the first time. I started a CFA teaching business. I also started an angel investment collective and was actively investing in startup companies myself. And the plan was to turn that into a venture capital fund. But after about 8 years of that, when I found the church, just over 3 years ago, probably right now when we're having this conversation, I found the church, started learning more and more and more. And after I'd done that for about 18 months, I realized how much I had compromised my own values, even the values I wasn't calling myself a Christian, but my parents had done a good enough job instilling in me certain things that I had just done away with. I'd thrown them aside to be expedient in the workplace. I don't want to say I was treating people as a means towards an end, but that's effectively what I was doing oftentimes. And so I eventually got to the point where all the work I was doing in this exciting world of venture capital, startup investing, etc., working alongside people with more money than anyone ever needs, more money than they know what to do with. And I realized I was just kind of a hollow shell of a human. All the material comforts in the world weren't doing it. My wife and I, we weren't married yet. But we were living together. We were doing all the wrong things, doing everything other than being married. And we both realized that either this is meaningless or there's more to life than this. And started questioning what that is, which ultimately led me to make a career change and start focusing on putting my faith at the forefront of what I do professionally, and that, God willing, is what I will do for the rest of my career, be it long or short.
Wow. That's a lot. You speak fast, so you packed a lot of punch in there for a minute or two. A couple of questions.
Yeah.
So the first is, what is it? Well, I guess I'll start with the end. Does that vision become? Is it clear at the moment of like what endeavors you're going to engage in that are more aligned with what you believe, or is that just sort of, hey, this is all new to me, this is my philosophy now, this is my theology, and I will be finding some endeavor at some point that does this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say that there are some days where I feel like it's been made very clear, and then there's other days where I'll, whether it's moments of doubt or questioning my own sanity, or listening to people that care about me and love me and question, why I would make a radical career change. I was, my job title was super sexy. I worked for someone that had been a billionaire at one point, overseeing a lot of their investments, managing director of venture capital, my job title. I was on a good path, and I left all that. And under controversial circumstances, we'll say that I basically got to the point where I couldn't put up with the wokeness and the progressiveness and the everything that's so hostile to our faith. And so I made a stand in May 2023 and basically publicly stated that I don't buy into the sexual propaganda that we're all supposed to celebrate the coming month. I just said, I said it publicly. I said my faith compels me to believe this, and I'm not the only person, and most of us just feel afraid to share it. And there were consequences of that, which led me to basically make a career change. Like, I walked away entirely. And after that, there's a lot of people in my social circle who, think I'm crazy for having said what I said or made that change, and then refusing to back away from it so that I could go back to that job. And so I would say that since then, which has been about a year and a half now, since then, I feel like my commitment to make my faith the foundation of what I do professionally has becoming more and more clear. And there are a lot of things that have happened through, just by the grace of God and me being willing to take risks and open myself up to things that to a lot of people seem crazy, but it makes more and more sense the longer I do it. Having said that, of course, we all have our moments of doubt. We all have our moments of, what was I doing? What was I thinking? But those are temporary and fewer and far between now, certainly than it was about 18 months ago.
Wow. So what was the straw that broke the camel's back? Were you having to sign on to some kind of diversity and or sexual diversity and or Pride Month kind of manifesto? Were you just investing in companies that were celebrating this too much? Was your own firm just kind of outwardly aligned with this and vocal about it and wanted you to come on board? What was the actual impetus behind your decision to stand up and do something different?
Yeah, I'd say probably two things that happened around the same time. So my brother and his wife welcomed their child, so my nephew and godson, into the world. And so in early early 2023, they lived in England at the time. We went to England for the baptism. And there was just something about, this is the first child to be welcomed into my family. So there was something about that, like seeing this new human life and coming home from that trip, and then realizing the more I was hearing about the messaging surrounding transgenderism and all of that stuff, and there was just something that I was really wrestling with. This little boy has come into the world, and people in our culture would say, but he might not be a little boy. And there was just something about that I just I don't know. I don't know why it rattled me as much as it did, but it really rattled me.
So absurd.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. And so it was sort of in that's the state of mind I was in. Whereas I'm like, there's actually people who think that my brother telling his family that this is a boy and he's given him a boy's name is like presumptuous, like, well, he might not be a boy or whatever. So that was the state of mind I was in. I don't know why exactly, but then fast forward a couple months, and a lot of the companies that I was evaluating to invest in and stuff, as was my job, they're flying that flag, which one, and celebrating it. And I just realized, I'm like, man, like every one of these companies that I invest in, I'm at least tacitly saying this is a good thing. And that I really wrestled with that. And then the straw that broke the camel's back ultimately was, I made this statement on social media, basically being like, my faith compels me to believe this. This is not, and I don't have the statement with me, but I don't think anything I said was inappropriate. I don't think anything I said was beyond just basically reaffirming what the church's teachings have been for centuries, millennia. But I was on the board of directors for a certain company and had been for years. And someone on that board of directors knew someone who saw what I said, complained, totally misinterpreted what I said, but just shared their opinion of what I said with the chairman of the board. The chairman completely overreacted, and in hindsight, I believe knows they overreacted, and they basically requested my resignation. And so that was the straw that broke the camel's back, where I realized, wow, I'm kind of at a no going back point. Either I shut my mouth, apologize for something I'm not sorry for, and buy into this whole thing, or I stand by what I believe. And so I would say that was probably the point.
Did you regret doing it?
That's a really good question. The answer is yes and no. There were times for sure where I did. There were times where, because of the hardship. Why couldn't
I just not said that?
Exactly. Literally.
What changed?
Totally. And we probably all have moments like that in our lives, right? Totally. But I think after, when the dust was settling, I was put on a leave of absence by my employer, which I understood why they did it, although, clearly I wouldn't have done that in their shoes, but I understood why they did it. But while I was on that leave of absence for 3 or 4 days, I just talked, really openly and honestly with my wife, and we were in the process at the time of coming into the church. And so we weren't Catholic yet, but we knew that this is where we were called. And so we just talked, and I said, like, babe, if we're doing this, then, we might blow up our families here. Neither of us come from Catholic households. So we knew when we agreed to convert to the Catholic Church that we might blow up our families because of and we can get into this maybe a little later, but because of my situation, I'd been married previously and then, non-sacramentally married. So we were going through the annulment process for my first marriage. So my wife and I were not validly married, and so we were living celibate lives together. And so I was putting her through a ton, and so then I go and do this, and I ask her then, I'm like, babe, if we're serious about this, then Christ makes a complete claim on our lives, and I don't just get to push things into a closet because there's money to be made, or there's deals to be done, or there's feelings not to be hurt. I don't feel like I can live that way. And my wife is so much braver than I am, and she completely supported me. And so if not for that, I probably would have had way more moments of like, what have I done? Why
right.
What?
You had a good partner.
Very much so.
And what a blessing that it sounds like she was converting at the same time.
Yes.
So there was no dissonance there, which is a huge blessing.
Completely.
because I had a similar situation with my ex. We were living in sin. She was Catholic, but found my conversion to the Catholic faith, instead of just the seriousness of it, it just threw a wedge between us. She was just like, why, like, this is really weird. So anyway, it was like, you're really lucky that didn't happen.
Yeah. Amen.
That's it's very interesting, because I mean, that's really what it is. It's the church versus this kind of sexual revolution juggernaut.
Yeah.
And that's what, that's the battle lines today, it seems to me. It's like,
I agree entirely.
We can't, I mean, it's just, you either affirm the church's teaching and understanding and anthropology of the human person and metaphysic, and if you do, you cannot accept what the culture is. Period. End of sentence. And there's not a lot of like wiggle room.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a huge amount of gray area, and we live in this culture of just this insane kind of liberal, this obsession with, you can't make any truth claims.
Yeah.
Like we live in this culture, it seems to me, of, what is that? I forget, it might have been Dostoevsky. Somebody said, nothing is true and everything is permitted. And that's the only thing and that's true. That's like the only truth that is, right?
Right.
There's no truth and everything's okay. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like Dostoevsky had it like, if there's no God, then everything's permitted.
Yeah.
So that's really where we are.
Yes.
And it was sold initially as like tolerance. Like we just have to tolerate each other living in this pluralistic kind of society. And then it seems as though it's metastasized beyond tolerance to forced acceptance, as you just highlighted, which is like, you don't have to just tolerate it, and maybe tolerate it but disagree.
Yeah.
Hey, like, if you want to do that, I'm not trying to put you in jail. I'm not trying to, like, I'm just saying that I'm not on board. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So, and that's not acceptable. Like, you can't disagree.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a totalitarian ideology.
It very much is.
It's totalizing you all the way down to the very end. Did you ever read the book 1984 by George Orwell?
When I was growing up, we had to read it in school and stuff, but I've referred back to this, I don't know if dystopian is the right word, but this thought control seemingly moving towards, a variant of totalitarianism.
Yes.
Yeah. And frankly, like, I think we're getting there in a lot of ways in our culture. Like that, there was a time years ago where I've been like, that's you're overreacting or whatever. But I don't know if you saw this recently, but I live in Canada, and so there's been controversy in Canada for years about the residential school system and everything. Well, we have a member of our parliament. So this person represents, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of my fellow citizens, setting laws for all of us to follow. And this backbencher member of parliament has proposed that we make it illegal in this country to question the prevailing narrative surrounding what happened in these residential schools, all of which basically say the Catholic Church is complicit in the worst evil of all sorts of evils, even though there's been no bodies found, there's been no actual concrete evidence of this. But for you to remind people that no bodies have been found would be criminal. And that to me is getting dangerously close to totalitarianism.
Yeah. At the end of the reason I asked, what you said reminded me of the end of that book where Winston, who's like our hero, he's asked to assent to the proposition that like 2 + 2 = 5. Right. Because the revolution insists upon a lie, right?
Yeah. And
Chesterton has this part, I think, in Orthodoxy, where he's like, swords will be drawn over the proposition that like 2 + 2 = 4. Essentially. Yeah. Like we will be fighting, like we will be fighting over the most basic common sense thing.
Yes.
So anyway, so like they're torturing him to get Winston to assent to 2 + 2 = 5, and finally he does, and because they're torturing him, and he's like, but they're like, and then they look at each other like, we don't believe you really believe it though. And so they keep torturing him. It's like,
Wow.
it's so dark. It's so demonic.
Wow.
And anyway, yeah, I think you're learning the lesson that, first of all, as your youth, this idea that, like, Christianity was broken until a German monk came around in 1500 or so and fixed it all. Like, now the real Christianity comes around or something.
Yeah.
Like, to me as a convert, I came from the Jewish faith, so I never really got into too much of the Protestant thing, but it just seemed so, like, strange to me, the Protestant thing. I know I have it. Like, I have a friend who converted at the same time, and he went to the Protestant thing, and there's a very big anti-Catholic sentiment amongst a lot of strands of Protestantism. So that fight goes deep. So what caused your conversion to the faith? So you talked about, okay, so you went away, you were an atheist for a while, you were kind of a materialist, you went into chasing after things of the world, found them, became successful. What was it? How did God call you to his church ultimately?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard to give, like, definitive, explicit steps, but there was certainly a path and the biggest things I can point to is a combination of, this was during the pandemic, right? And so during the pandemic, life has sort of been turned upside down, and I feel like a lot of people were probably starting to question things that you've just taken for granted or whatever. And that was certainly the case for me. So that started, I think it was during the pandemic, and, the woman who's now my wife, but we were, living together, not married, materially comfortable, all this kind of stuff. And then all the stuff that we sort of quote unquote lived for, traveling and going out and all this kind of stuff, well, that's taken away. And you just realize it's like, okay, well, I don't even know if those things were making me happy. They were just what I was filling my time with. And that surely can't be all there is to this life. And so I think that was part of it. Then just over 3 years ago, I went through a health crisis, and the suffering, we all suffer, right? And I guess trying to find meaning in the suffering was a big part of it. And then I guess those two things combined with my brother had just started. He's now completed, but he was doing his PhD in theology at the University of Oxford, and so now not Catholic theology. He was in Anglican, the Anglican college, but my brother converted from our Baptist tradition to Anglicanism as he was doing his PhD, and I sort of followed him. So I saw him do that, and I'm like, well, I knew at the time, it's like, well, I can't go Catholic because we grew up, anti-Catholic Baptists. So I can't go Catholic, but there was a ton of stuff about the Anglican tradition. Now I know all of it is Catholic, but there was a ton of stuff about it that seemed really attractive. Beautiful cathedrals, music, the liturgy, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. And so I say that those three things happening in short order led me ultimately to getting into a frame of mind where I was open to, okay, what is the meaning of life ultimately? What is this all about? I believe that there's got to be a religious component to that. It's not the one that I grew up in. I didn't think that the Baptists had it right. I thought there was a whole bunch missing. And so I wanted to think that the Anglicans have it right, and found myself in there. But then the more I started learning, and I think, St. John Henry Newman says it best, to be steeped in history. I believe it's St. John Henry Newman. To be steeped in history is to cease to be Protestant. And that's what it was for me. The more I learned about the history of the Anglican Church, the more I had to go to Catholic history. And then that's where all the answers seem to be. And so I'd say that is ultimately how I found myself coming towards the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Anglican thing was strange also. It's like, oh, so Henry VIII wanted to be with this woman. Yep. So he created a church so that he could have the sexual experiences that he wanted.
Yeah, literally.
So it's that's the basis of the Anglican Church.
Yep.
So, whatever. That's to me, it's that's really an odd way of creating a whole, segment of the faith. But
yes.
Anyway, yeah, they do keep a lot. The churches are beautiful, and they have the Eucharist. I don't know a lot of other beliefs. I was just on a plane back with a guy from an Anglican priest from Tokyo, and I was flying from Europe to here, and so we talked a lot about it. And I asked him why he was an Anglican and not a Catholic, because he converted from a Protestant, from a different Protestant upbringing, and he said that he liked the fact that in the Anglican religion he could give the Eucharist to anybody, not just the baptized.
Right. Yeah. There's like there are, I don't want to be needlessly critical of my Anglican friends,
Sure.
but having said that, I think all the things about Anglicanism that I really loved and everything are ultimately Catholic. Like they truly are,
right.
which is why, the Anglicans will say we're the via media, we're the middle way between Protestantism and Catholicism. And they will cling to that as as I guess a good thing, as opposed to the way I now see it, which is like, well, that's just trying to hedge your bets. That's just like trying to have the best of both worlds, rather than actually committing to something and realizing that truth claims mean that some things are false. If there's truth, there must be falsity, and trying to have it both ways kind of feels like a cop out. Like you're trying to by trying to appease everybody, you appease nobody in the end.
Yeah, you can't really cut the baby in half.
Precisely.
You can't really do that. You killed the baby.
Precisely.
I'm interested also in your conversion during the pandemic, because I came into the church. I was doing RCIA at that time as well, and it was so stark, the contrast. I don't know where. I mean, because obviously there's different places in the world that reacted to COVID in different ways. Like I went down south here to visit a friend in South Carolina. I actually moved to South Carolina because she was living in the north, and she just was not on board with the COVID hysteria at all.
Yeah.
And so she went down south just to get away from it. Literally, she moved her whole family. And I went down there in the height of COVID, and there was nothing. It was like you got off. It was like it didn't even exist. But up in Philadelphia, where I'm from, people were super enthusiastic about the COVID. Like they loved COVID. Like COVID was like their religion.
Yeah.
But I noticed when I went to Mass, I felt myself a part of this. Outside was so crazy. People are like looking at you like with a cross if you're like don't have the mask on and whatever. And then in Mass, it was this super slow, beautiful procession with this multi-thousand-year procession. And I was in this arc of sanity, it seemed to me, compared to, which totally accepts death. And it seemed to me as though like the outside world, it was like news to them that they could die.
Yeah.
And they were just freaking out like, oh my gosh, this could happen to me.
Yeah.
Like, or whatever. Like I could die or suffer or whatever, And it's like this contrast couldn't have been clearer to me, and where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the place that obviously accepts suffering. I mean, you look up to the altar and there's a cross there. So, and you're praying the rosary, which is which is about lines about your death.
Yeah.
And it's a religion about the defeat of death.
Yeah.
And our ultimate home in eternity with God.
Yeah.
And that was just such a relief compared to the COVID insanity that was around me in Philadelphia. I'm curious to your experience if it was similar, because we came in at around a similar-ish time.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe sort of part of my unique story is because my wife and I were attending Anglican services when we found the Catholic Church. We are officially members of the Ordinariate. So the Ordinariate being, kind of this, I think there's 3 around the world, but created in 2012, basically as a way for people that were Anglicans, I think some Methodists, to come into full communion with Rome. And so we attend the Ordinariate parish here in Calgary, which is the only one in the city. And, it's a big city. There's, I think, 75 non-ordinariate parishes, and then there's the one ordinariate parish. And most people are like us. They're former Anglicans. And so the unique thing about the ordinariate is it's very traditional. And so it's the old English Mass. It's what Mass would have been like if you went to Mass in England before Henry VIII, had his desire to divorce and marry and do it like amazing. Over and over.
It sounds really beautiful.
It's really cool. So if anyone's listening and has never attended an ordinariate Mass, I'd really recommend it. It's kind of like a somewhere in the middle of a Novus Ordo Mass and a traditional Latin Mass. It's beautiful. It's reverent. And because it is grounded in deep history and tradition, they the ordinariate didn't have a lot of time for the intensive restrictions that were being placed on places of worship and stuff, which were pretty intense here where we live. And so they, at no point during the pandemic did they shut down. They still offered the Eucharist. They offer it, if you're attending an ordinariate mass, you're on your knees, you receive on the tongue and everything. And they did that the entire time. And so it's interesting because when my wife and I first found our way actually coming into the church, the pandemic hysteria had sort of subsided a little bit, but we were hearing all these stories about people who had been so rocked by, the entire world has descended into insanity, and the one place of sanity that we could find seemed to be this little parish in the middle of the city. And so I guess we're lucky and profoundly blessed because we stumbled into that place where this measure of sanity in the midst of the opposite of it had been all along. And for that, I'm so grateful because we got to miss, I think, a bunch of the insanity that did seep into other parts of the church. And, that's common. We know that that's common. We sort of sidestepped all that through the grace of God and random luck.
Oh, that's great. I'm curious, when you were having this, to switch back to your work experience, when you were having this kind of issue recently because of your social media post, were people coming to you and saying, were they presenting it to you like, hey, I'm with you, man, but or was it like, you're an apostate, like you're not on board with, whatever, insanity?
Yeah.
Or how was it? Was it like, oh, look, man, I'm with you. Like, this is crazy, but I got a board to appease here.
Yeah. Yeah. More the latter. Those people that I heard from, I didn't hear from anyone that disagreed with what I said. Again, I think what I said was pretty reasonable. In fact, it is reasonable. And I think we all probably know that the wokest, progressivist, the insanity, the vast majority of people who are pushing this stuff, they've just bought into a worldview without thinking critically about it. They don't actually believe most of that. They've just bought in. But there's a small minority of radical progressivist activists who push it, and everyone's afraid of those people because they're the ones that will, sort of crucify you on social media and everything. And no one wants to be the target of their vitriol and their,
100%.
You know what I mean? And so the vast majority of people that said something after I shared what I did and then, got canceled by my employer and all that kind of stuff. Many of them said, I agree entirely. This is nuts. And the but was always followed by, I can't say anything. I'm worried about what'll happen to me. I've got to put up with this as well because I've got investors or I've got, stakeholders and all that kind of stuff. And so my experience was that the overwhelming majority of people seemed to at least not be offended by anything I said. And most of them agreed with most of it, even if for different reasons. But almost 100% of them would not have said what I said because of the fear of cancel culture and what follows afterwards.
Right. Did you know that was like was it like a big moment when you posted this? Were you like, okay, if I do this, or was it just like you're, 2 a.m, you can't sleep and you rip something off on Twitter and whatever, what, or was it like, okay, this is the moment I'm going to, stick my theses on the church wall, your Martin Luther moment.
Yeah.
And then they gave him the option to take it back and he couldn't do it. I stand here, my conscience. So like, where were you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I share pretty actively on social media, selectively. Like I don't use a bunch of social media sites, but the ones that I do, I'm committed.
What's your social media weapon of choice?
Mostly LinkedIn, just because I've got a professional network there. So mostly LinkedIn.
So this happened on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was the...
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So I shared on LinkedIn, and I think I knew when I did it that there would be pushback. I don't know that I expected it to be as intense as it was, but I knew when I shared what I shared that this is an unpopular opinion, at least if you go by the prevailing narrative in the culture. I didn't know that it was going to lead where it ultimately led, for sure, but I knew that there would be something that came back. So I did it prepared for what I thought would be the consequences. The consequences just happened to be more intense than I had anticipated.
Wow. I'm interviewing next week a woman here at University of Pennsylvania who's got kind of her name is Professor Amy Wax, and this woman, she's Jewish, she's not Catholic, but she's a law professor at University of Pennsylvania here locally, and she spoke out against the diversity and the insanity at universities in general. And she's had tenure, and they've been trying to fire this woman. And
wow.
They've been putting her through the ringer. They're offering her all this money just to shut up and be like, okay, just don't talk about it. And she refuses. She's like, no, I don't want your money.
Wow.
I'm going to say publicly what I think, and I'm going because that's the country I live in, supposedly.
Wow.
And it's just interesting, the people that decide, that you made a similar kind of decision where you're like, I'm going to say something that I don't have to say. It's easier for me not to say. Yep. You could say it's in the short term expedient for me not to say it. Mm-hmm. But yet somehow some people just are compelled to become public. Yeah. And I remember this Alexander Solzhenitsyn, wrote the Gulag Archipelago about his experience in the gulags of the Soviet Union, and his book was what kind of discredited the Soviet Union, because he said, hey, there's a bunch of death camps and work camps going on here, and he was saying that he says, if we had stood up earlier, before it got beyond where it was controllable, we could have stopped this revolution which ruined my country. If we had just been when it was small, a group of small activists, I guess at that time were called Bolsheviks. If we had stood up and raised our hands and resisted, but then none of us did, and so we lost our country.
Totally.
Totally. Were you thinking along those lines? You're like, look, I can't not do this because look, I got a young I've just got married, I'm going to be open to life in my family, and so I'm going to have kids, and I can't. Or was it just not, there wasn't a lot of you're just like, look, I just want to say this and let the chips fall where they may?
Yeah, I'd say so. While this is all going on, I'm also doing a part-time master's degree in theology at the University of Toronto. And the University of Toronto is Canada's biggest university, and it's also the university where Jordan Peterson was an instructor for, precisely. And so Jordan Peterson's departure from the University of Toronto shortly preceded my arrival as a student there, and we all know why he left. It's because he refused to
pander. Saw the videos.
Yeah, he refused to pander to the insanity for what it was. So I think. And I'm not saying that everything Jordan Peterson says is gospel, but I think he is one of the people that can stand in the midst of the insanity and the woke mob, to use his terminology, and really not bat an eye and still speak the truth and just sort of let the chips fall where they may. And so I think there was some element of that where I saw, okay, there are some people in our culture who are prepared to do this. And I don't think that I'm particularly brave, but I don't think I'm a coward either, and I don't want to be a coward. And so when I see something that I feel super convicted about, and I know other people feel the same, but other people aren't saying it, I don't know that I can, in good conscience, just stand here and be like, well, since no one else is doing it, then I'm not going to do it either, and I'm off the hook. I think that's a dangerous precedent for all of us to set, and I didn't want to be guilty of it. Now, I don't know that I did the most prudent thing, but I also think that looking back, the end result of getting myself canceled, even though that didn't really happen, but that was the threat, is that I was going to get canceled and stuff, and where my life has taken me since then have inevitably been what I would have wanted at the time. I didn't want to be working in those environments. I wanted to be doing something consistent with my faith. I had to do a scary thing that blew up my world for a little bit of time, but it has ultimately gotten me here. And so I can't regret it, even though at the time it was super scary. And I understand why other people wouldn't do that scary thing.
Right. Prudence is tricky because it's like, okay, would it be prudent to be an abolitionist during slave times? Like, is that really prudent? I mean, you're going to blow up your life and you're going to, I guess I guess the answer would be yes, but it doesn't seem like it would be. I mean, prudence seems to be like, okay, let's just...
Totally.
But, I mean, it's not, I guess... I think that Yeah, the Jordan Peterson thing is really interesting. First of all, yeah, not everything he says to me. His answers to like, does he believe in God, baffle me.
Totally.
It's just like all of a sudden you become like an epistemological like.
Yeah.
You just can't know anything.
Yeah.
It's like you know, like, okay, all right, Jordan, fine, fair enough. I'll pray for you. Hopefully, obviously, his wife is much more along. She's on the level.
Yeah.
I just think I don't understand Jordan, man, and I really like him because he was a big part in my conversion story, as you know, because you listened to the interview. But I don't understand his reticence to do that. But anyway, whatever. That's Jordan. That's Jordan's path with the Lord. But so. What was it in particular that you were objecting to? Was it the pride agenda in general? Was it the transgender subset? Or was it, what was it, or just ESG in general, like the sort of what they call, at least I don't know if they have that in Canada, but, you know, kind of whatever, let's say more like the woke index of company.
Yeah.
The meta woke index. Which was it? What was it that you were objecting to?
Yeah. So specifically, basically, I made a comment. Like as I wrote a post as an investment professional, and I said, "Look, as an investment professional, I know a thing or two about investing in publicly traded corporations. I have done this for a living. I know vastly more than the average person about this. And in my view, publicly traded corporations, and this was coming right after it was noted that Target had been prominently displaying certain transgender products for children, specifically very young children, prominently in their stores. And so now, and again, my mindset at the time was I've just been to the baptism of my nephew and godson, and so I was just in this mindset where I can't believe that someone would dare to claim that us calling this boy a boy is somehow somehow remotely
untoward.
Yeah. And so that was my mindset. And so when I saw that Target, a massive retailer, publicly traded corporation, has investors, is prominently displaying these products, I basically said, just like I think most of us would agree that these companies, the reason that they're not prominently displaying crucifixes and stuff like that in the lead up to Easter, they also shouldn't be displaying prominently these products that are pandering to a subset of society that is not universally agreed to. That is not your job. And so basically what my plea is that if you are a person, I said, of good faith, if you share my beliefs as a Catholic, or if you're a person of other faiths, and I specifically said Jewish people, Muslim people, if you adhere to or believe in traditional sexual ethics, I think is the terminology I use to keep it sort of, I don't know if ecumenical is the word, but I wasn't trying to be Catholic or else. I was just saying my faith compels me to this. I think this is inappropriate. As an investment professional and as a person of faith, if you do too, what you can do is speak with your dollars. I'm not going to shop at Target anymore as a result. And so that's what I posted. A bunch of people liked it. A bunch of people shared it. But it was that one person who knew the chairman of the board of this one board of directors I was on who didn't like it because, as far as I understand, they are a part of this community, whatever it is, I don't know how, and they interpret it as me being hateful somehow.
An ally.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it was like it was in a business context in a certain way. You're like, look, I'm just not going to buy from here, and I would like question your conscience whether you should as well.
Exactly.
If you are on board with me.
Yep.
I just choose not to shop here.
Precisely.
Yeah. Wow. And you ended up having to resign from your job for that. That's
correct.
That's crazy. That is really crazy. So what would you recommend if somebody else were thinking about speaking up and they're listening to this, and either now or in the future when it's way harder to speak up?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to get easier.
Agreed.
It's not getting the trend lines aren't great here. Yeah. So if they were thinking about doing something similar, now that you've had the experience of doing it and what you've been through, what would be your words of counsel to them?
Yeah, I've been asked that other times, and I guess I would say, one, prudence is a virtue for a reason, and it's a hard one. And you Andrew, you pointed that out. Like, it is hard to know, were the abolitionists being prudent in saying what they said at the time. It's easy for us in hindsight to look back and be like, oh, we're so grateful that people did that. But at the time, you probably would have had a lot of people that love them and care about them and know them, telling them, keep your mouth shut. This isn't prudent. So I think being prudent means rising above what other people are going to interpret as what prudent is. And I think it probably means prayerful discernment and trying to determine, like, okay, God has probably put me in this place and time for a reason, and maybe multiple reasons. And is one of those reasons potentially a chance for me to act in accordance with my conscience and say the difficult thing that might have material consequences, but is right from a spiritual and even a psychological perspective? And if the answer to that is absolutely not, well, then okay, then maybe now isn't the time. But if you can't say absolutely not, then maybe this is a time where you need to think about respectfully and prudently, again, speaking the truth. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And that I'm not pretending that's an easy thing to do. I'm not saying, sure. But I'd say that's probably what it is. If you can't confidently say that I definitely shouldn't be, well, then I think you have to wonder, like, okay, why? Like, why am I maybe being called to this? And be open to that.
Everybody wants to be reborn. Nobody wants to die.
Precisely.
Nobody wants to let the old man die.
Yeah.
Like that was, and I think that as I hear your story, that's what comes to mind for me. It's like, well, he had, like, this is his old life.
Yes.
And given the seriousness, the apparent seriousness of your conversion, you couldn't live that life.
Correct.
So how it died is, it could have whimpered and sort of, you just left. It could have, but you sort of went out in a blaze of glory.
Exactly.
Which, I think it's great.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, it's sort of, like it was going to die. Like that part of you was dying anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe it's unfortunate because it was like really lucrative and there was a lot of benefits in the material for it, but it wasn't aligned with who you are. And obviously if you have those skills, then you're going to find a way to succeed in something else. It's not as though like, you got to that level for a certain reason and you're still that same person now with a deeper moral conviction. And I actually notice in myself, my business results have improved as my morality has improved. As like I've grown as a person morally. Yeah. And I don't think that that's accidental.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed.
I didn't do it for that reason.
But it is.
In fact, I thought it would be detrimental. Yeah. Because, if you're going to if you want more money, you just cheat or whatever and like get more money. But like actually I think it's the other way. I've noticed a trend line of the two things coming together in a certain way. So and I also love it also opens you up now, like you're public. So now like you've already burned that ship. So, like I have on my company's website, we have the cross. Yeah. And if you're following me on Facebook or on LinkedIn, like all I post about is Jesus. Like I don't really like. Everyone like reach out to me privately, like, this is like a business networking site. I'm like, look, man, I'm not in this. Like business is like, okay, I'm doing business. I'm here for that. But if I have anybody's attention, I want to talk to them about something deeper than money. There's lots of people. You can, you're scrolling around on LinkedIn. You get plenty of business advice.
Totally.
Like, you get plenty of business stuff. I want to be the one thing to just tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, where are you today in your real life? Yeah. Which is your walk with the Lord. Yes. Where are you with that? Because that's more important than how much money you're making or how many, whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, but anyway, so I'm super excited. Do you have any sense of what the future looks like as far as projects goes, or is it? I know I asked you that kind of in the beginning, but do you have, or is there? It's just sort of like totally open. I know you're doing your podcast, and what is the podcast? I should have written it down. Yeah. So the answer is yes. We have a sense. A couple things. I co-host with a good friend of mine who worked in that environment that I left and got canceled from, and he subsequently left afterwards. So we could
do stuff together. And, so we have our own little Catholic podcast called Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. And basically what we do is we just try to talk with people about issues of relevance to those of us trying to live our faith in a hostile secular world. And so we don't shy away from any topics. We talk about abortion, we talk about cancel culture, we talk about, the religion of niceness and all this kind of stuff. So we have that. And then in addition to that, I'm in the process of starting 2 businesses that are specifically at the intersect of the faith, and they'll be hopefully advisory businesses to try to help Catholic entrepreneurs who are committed to their faith and want to provide for their families and stuff, but to do so the right way. So trying to give business counsel or business advice grounded in the Catholic social teaching and the magisterium is what it is.
Amen.
And then the other thing is I'm going to be consulting. I've started consulting for a Catholic media business, and that'll be part-time to start. But it's a result that opportunity arose because I've been overt about my faith and what I want to be doing. And if I wasn't, an opportunity like this never would have come around. And so that for anyone listening who's like, well, if I'm overt about this, then it can only shut doors. And my experience has been the very opposite.
Not true. Yeah, I think I've had more experience being out front with the pro-life stuff, and I sort of think about it in the same way as the abolitionists. I mean, to me, and when people talk to me about it, I'm like, when you look back in history, you look back at people who owned slaves, and you're like, how were they able to justify that to themselves? Like, they seemed intelligent, and they seemed like pretty on point with a lot of things, but they thought it was okay to own other people because of their race or whatever. I'm like, I think people are going to look back at us, and I think we're in that same kind of moment.
Yeah.
And they seem pretty smart. Like, they thought it was okay to kill their babies. They thought that was kosher.
Yeah.
That's worse than enslaving people.
Yeah.
Like, you're murdering your own children.
Yeah.
At like an industrial scale.
Yeah.
That's kind of insane.
It is.
So like, we're like, you and I are both like men of a time where, sort of like a time that's very much not where we are culturally. So we have to like live in that eternal space of truth, goodness, and beauty, and hope that the culture catches up, but also expecting that we're in a process of repaganization.
We are. And if I can add on to that, I think you articulated that so well. And I think something that I've had to remind myself of, I speaking to people, we live in this culture where anxiousness, loneliness, like all these things are like epidemics, right?
How's
like,
it working for you?
Yeah, precisely. You know what I mean? And I bought into all that. And so, like I now have, because I focused on all the wrong things, I have a severe like anxiety disorder. And the only time I find peace is when I focus on the things that transcend us here and now. It's when I realize like I'm not called to this world. I'm here for a period of time, but I'm called elsewhere. And the only time I find peace ultimately is when I remind myself that God is calling me somewhere else. And this is just a step on the journey. And so while I'm here, the things I do and what I spend my time on should be always geared towards where I'm, God willing, where I'm going to be forever. And that is even many people that share our faith forget that too often. And I think guys like you and I can hopefully be a part of reminding them that they ought not to.
100%. Yeah. What I found is that the anxiety dissipates to the extent that you're become comfortable with your own death.
Totally.
Because that's ultimately all of the fear.
Yes.
Is a fear of death.
Yes.
It like all resolves to that.
Yeah, it does.
So the faith is so helpful because you realize that death isn't the end.
Yeah.
Now that's a spectrum. You don't, you're not 100% there at all moments, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not saints like Maximilian Kolbe's,
Yeah.
like, hey, we're good to go. But, to whatever extent, the closer you get there, I'm a little older than you. My experience is that like the fear will like gradually decrease.
Totally.
So that's been my experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been so wonderful speaking with you, Travis. Is there any place that you want people to go if they want to find you? What's the best place for them to go look at your work and follow along with your continued journey?
Yeah, absolutely. People can check out the podcast website, and from there you can track me down elsewhere. But
what is that podcast website?
So it's coffcomcat.com. So COFCOM. COFCOM, CAT.com.
Awesome. And I wonder if you would feel comfortable ending us in a prayer.
Absolutely. I would be a pleasure. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the chance to come together and have conversations like this, especially in the midst of our culture, which at times can feel overwhelming and even debilitating. And I pray for Andrew and people like him who are in the midst of this culture, speaking truth and trying to help our brothers and sisters who might be lost find their way to the truth and to your church. And so we pray for those on their journey. Anyone that has listened here, we pray that you would bless them and use us as instruments of your grace in their lives. We pray all of this through Christ our Lord, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Travis. It was really wonderful speaking with you. God bless you and your family, and continue on, man.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.